She gave birth to black triplets and then told everyone they died. 27 years later, they walked into her elite car event, richer, louder, and wearing her green eyes. And when one said, "Hi, Mother," she almost dropped her champagne. Now, take a breath and enjoy the story. Rose Powell gripped the champagne flute tightly, her knuckles whitening as she scanned the crowded showroom of the Atlanta Luxury Auto Expo. 27 years of carefully constructed lies threatened to crumble around her as she spotted them across the room. 3 identical men in perfectly tailored suits, their confident smiles identical as they shook hands with the CEO of the most prestigious car manufacturer in Europe. "What's wrong, Rose? You look like you've seen a ghost," her husband Spencer whispered, placing a concerned hand on her lower back. 3 ghosts, actually. The thought flashed through her mind unbidden, bringing with it a wave of dizziness that nearly made her drop her glass. "Could we step outside for a moment? I need some air," she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the ambient jazz and excited chatter of Atlanta's elite. How could this be happening? Rose had made absolutely certain those babies would disappear from her life forever. That had been the deal. The only solution her family would accept when their perfect daughter had returned from college pregnant by a man they deemed entirely unsuitable. Not just any man, but a black scholarship student with no family connections and no fortune to speak of. The shame and scandal would have destroyed her family's standing in Atlanta society. "Are you certain?" Her mother had asked at the hospital after the triplets had been born. 3 perfect baby boys with their father's warm brown skin and Rose's green eyes. "Once you sign, there's no going back." With tears streaming down her face, 20-year-old Rose had nodded and signed the papers, convinced by her parents that this was the only way to preserve her future. The babies would be adopted separately by 3 different families. She would never see them again. She would return to school, graduate, and eventually marry someone suitable. Someone like Spencer. And that's exactly what had happened. Rose had built the perfect life, married to a successful investment banker, active in all the right charities, mother to 2 beautiful blonde daughters who attended the most prestigious private school in Atlanta. No one knew her secret. No one, except her parents who had taken it to their graves. But now somehow, against impossible odds, all 3 of her sons were here, in the same room as her, successful enough to be mingling with the ultra-wealthy at an invitation-only luxury car event. "Rose, are you listening?" Spencer's voice broke through her thoughts. "I said Martin Davies wants to introduce us to the Harrison brothers. They're the talk of the financial world. Triplets who started with nothing and built an empire. Apparently they've just become major investors in Aston Martin." Rose's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone around her must hear it. The Harrison brothers. Of course they wouldn't have her last name. Of course they wouldn't even have the same last name as each other if they'd been adopted separately. But somehow they had found each other. And now they were about to meet her. "The tallest one, Colin, is the financial genius," Spencer continued, completely oblivious to his wife's distress. "The one with the glasses, Donald, is the tech innovator, and Martin, the one with the scar on his eyebrow, handles their public relations. They're remarkable, raised in completely different circumstances but reunited in college when they discovered they were triplets separated at birth. Their story is incredible." Rose felt the room spin as Spencer took her elbow, guiding her toward the 3 men who were now looking directly at her. The one called Martin whispered something to his brothers, and all 3 sets of identical green eyes, her eyes, focused on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Mrs. Powell," Martin said as she approached, his voice smooth and controlled. "We've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time." The knowing look in his eyes told Rose everything she needed to know. They knew exactly who she was. And this meeting was no coincidence. As the crowded room seemed to fall away, leaving only Rose and the 3 sons she had abandoned, one thought consumed her. How much did they know, and what did they want from her after all these years? "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private," Donald suggested, adjusting his glasses with a deliberate motion that reminded Rose painfully of their father. Jackson had made that same gesture whenever he was uncomfortable, but trying to appear confident. Rose nodded mutely as Martin signaled to a staff member who promptly guided them to a secluded VIP lounge away from the main showroom. Spencer, sensing something significant was unfolding but completely unaware of what it was, followed with a puzzled expression. "Rose, do you know these gentlemen?" he asked as the door closed behind them, leaving the five of them alone in the luxuriously appointed room. Before she could respond, Colin stepped forward, his imposing 6'3" frame making the already small room feel even more confined. "Your wife gave birth to us 27 years ago, Mr. Powell. Then she signed papers giving us away to separate families. We're her sons." Spencer's face drained of color. "That's impossible. Rose never had other children. We met in college and—" "I was 20 when it happened," Rose interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophomore year at Emory, before I met you." Spencer stared at her in disbelief. "In all our 24 years of marriage, you never thought to mention you had 3 sons?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rose looked at each of the triplets' faces, searching for some sign of the tiny babies she had held just once before they were taken away. Donald with his thoughtful eyes behind stylish glasses. Colin with his commanding presence and analytical gaze. Martin with his charismatic smile now replaced by a carefully neutral expression. "My parents forced me to give them up," she finally said. "They threatened to cut me off completely if I didn't. The father was—" She hesitated. The old prejudices still difficult to voice even after all these years. "Black," Martin finished for her, his tone matter of fact. "And a scholarship student, not from money, completely unsuitable for the daughter of Judge Hamilton, Blackwell and his socially prominent wife." Rose flinched at the accuracy of his assessment. "How long have you known about me?" Donald took a seat, motioning for the others to do the same. "We found each other by accident 10 years ago. Colin and I were both at MIT in different programs. Someone mistook me for him at a campus event, and when we met, well, discovering you have an identical twin is quite something. We found Martin a year later," Colin continued. "He was at Georgetown. Once we confirmed we were triplets through DNA testing, we hired a private investigator to find our birth parents. It took years," Martin added. "The adoptions were closed, the records sealed. We had to fight through a lot of legal barriers. We found our father first, Jackson Lewis." Rose's heart clenched at the name she hadn't spoken aloud in decades. "Jackson, is he—" "He died 4 years ago," Donald said quietly. "Car accident. He never knew about us." Tears welled in Rose's eyes. Despite everything, she had loved Jackson once. "I'm sorry. He was a good man." "Better than the family that made you throw away your children because of the color of their skin," Colin said sharply. Spencer, who had been silent, suddenly stood. "I need a moment." He walked to the other side of the room, staring out the window, his posture rigid with shock. "We didn't come here to destroy your life," Martin said, his tone softening slightly. "Though we certainly could have approached you years ago when we first found out who you were." "Then why now?" Rose asked, wiping away tears. "Why here, in public, with my husband present?" The triplets exchanged glances, some unspoken communication, passing between them that spoke of years of deep connection, a connection that should have included her. "We built our company from nothing," Donald explained. "M3 Ventures started in my garage 10 years ago. We specialize in AI-driven investment algorithms and sustainable technology integration for luxury brands. We're not just attending this event," Colin added. "We're taking a 20% stake in Powell Financial's luxury automobile investment portfolio." Rose's breath caught. "Spencer's company?" "Yes," Martin confirmed with a slight smile. "We've been negotiating with your husband's firm for months. He just didn't know who we really were." Spencer rejoined them, his face composed but still pale. "You orchestrated this entire situation," he said, understanding dawning. "The investment deal, the meeting here today. Business and family are both about long-term strategy, Mr. Powell, Colin replied. We learned that lesson early. What exactly do you want from me? Rose asked, her voice stronger now as she regained her composure. Initially, justice, Donald admitted. We thought about exposing everything, how the daughter of one of Atlanta's most prominent judges had 3 black sons she abandoned because her family couldn't bear the scandal. Rose closed her eyes, imagining the headlines, the destruction of her carefully built life. And now? Now we want to know who we are, Martin said simply. Where we come from. Jackson told his sister about you before he died, but he knew almost nothing. We have questions only you can answer. Your daughters don't know they have brothers, Colin observed. Yvonne is at Yale now, isn't she? And Jean just started at Princeton? The mention of her daughters sent a chill through Rose. Leave them out of this. They've done nothing wrong. Neither did we, Donald countered. Yet we grew up without a mother because of your choice. The tension in the room was palpable. Spencer moved to stand behind Rose's chair, placing a hand on her shoulder in quiet support despite his own evident shock and confusion. Our adoptive families were good to us, Martin continued. Loving, supportive, but we still grew up with holes in our identities that couldn't be filled. I understand you must hate me, Rose began. We don't hate you, Donald interrupted. We spent years angry, yes, but hate requires energy we'd rather direct elsewhere. Like buying shares in your husband's company, Colin added with a hint of the ruthless business acumen that had made the triplets millionaires before they turned 30. Which brings us to the real reason for this meeting, Martin said, leaning forward. We're hosting a charity gala next month for adoptees' rights and family reunification. All of Atlanta's elite will be there. And you want us to attend? Spencer asked incredulously. We want you to co-host, Donald clarified. Publicly acknowledge us as your sons, Rose. Not with the full story if you're not ready for that. But at least as children you were forced to give up for adoption. Rose felt dizzy with the implications. Such an acknowledgement would raise countless questions, trigger speculation, and change her standing in her social circle forever. Yet looking at these 3 remarkable men, her sons, she felt a longing she had suppressed for nearly 3 decades. If I refuse, she asked quietly, then the deal with Powell Financial falls through, Colin stated flatly. And while we won't actively expose you, we won't protect your secret either. Atlanta loves gossip, Mrs. Powell. How long before someone notices our eyes are exactly like yours? Spencer's hand tightened on Rose's shoulder. That's blackmail, he said tensely. We prefer to see it as negotiation, Martin replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. As the triplets stood to leave, Donald placed a business card on the table. Our private numbers, for when you're ready to talk, really talk. They filed out silently, leaving Rose and Spencer alone, in the wake of a revelation that had shattered the foundations of their marriage and lives. 24 years, Spencer finally said, his voice hollow. 24 years and I never knew this part of you existed. Rose reached for his hand, terrified he would pull away. I convinced myself it was in the past, that it would never matter again. And now? Now I have to decide whether I'm brave enough to face the truth, she whispered, or if I'll keep running from it like I've done my entire life. Outside the window, they could see the triplets stepping into a sleek black Bentley, 3 identical profiles silhouetted against the setting Atlanta sun. As the car pulled away, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that regardless of her decision, nothing would ever be the same again. The drive home from the auto expo passed in tense silence. Rose stared out the passenger window, watching Atlanta's skyline glitter against the darkening sky as Spencer navigated through evening traffic. The business card Donald had given her seemed to burn in her purse, a physical reminder of the collision between past and present. When they finally reached their Buckhead mansion, Spencer headed straight for the bar in his study. I think we need something stronger than wine for this conversation, he said, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. He handed one to Rose, who took it with trembling fingers. I don't know where to begin, she whispered. Spencer sank into his leather chair. The beginning would be good. All of it, Rose. No more secrets. The ice clinked in her glass as she took a fortifying sip and began the story she had buried for nearly 3 decades. I met Jackson Lewis in an American literature class. He was brilliant, the kind of student who challenged professors and made everyone think deeper about the material. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever known. A wistful smile crossed her face at the memory. We started studying together and then more. Did you love him? Spencer asked quietly. Rose met his eyes. Yes, I did. What happened? My parents happened. When I told them I was pregnant, my father exploded. Said Jackson was using me to climb socially, called him terrible names. She shuddered at the memory. Mother was calmer but equally determined. They presented it as protecting me, ensuring I could finish my education, have the right kind of future. They never once considered that I might want to keep my babies and be with Jackson. Did he know you were pregnant? Rose shook her head, tears welling. No. My parents sent me to a health retreat in North Georgia, really a private facility, for girls from good families who'd gotten themselves into trouble. I wrote Jackson a letter breaking things off, saying I needed to focus on my studies. It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done. She drained her glass before continuing. After the babies were born, I was lost. The adoption papers were already prepared. 3 separate families, closed adoptions. My parents insisted it was best for everyone. These children need families that understand their heritage, my mother said, as if that justified everything. And after? I returned to Emory for spring semester. Everyone was told I'd been studying abroad. 6 months later, I met you. She reached for his hand. I never told you because I wanted to forget it ever happened. I thought I had dealt with it, moved on. Spencer withdrew his hand, stood, and walked to the window. 24 years, Rose, we have daughters together. Were you ever going to tell me? I don't know, she admitted. I convinced myself it was better buried. That dredging it up would only cause pain. Well, it's certainly causing pain now, he said bitterly. Those men are blackmailing us. If we don't acknowledge them publicly, they'll tank a deal worth millions to the firm. They're not just those men, Spencer. They're my sons. Sons you abandoned. The words landed like a physical blow. Rose flinched but didn't argue. Yes. Spencer's phone chimed with an email notification. He checked it, his expression darkening. Colin Harrison just sent the revised contract terms. The deadline for our decision is 9 a.m. tomorrow. He tossed the phone onto his desk. I need to make some calls. To whom? Our lawyer, for starters. PR team next. If we're going to do this, we need to control the narrative. Rose stood, suddenly angry. Is that all you care about? The business implications? What am I supposed to care about, Rose? The sons you never told me existed? The fact that my wife has been lying to me our entire marriage? His voice rose with each question. Or maybe I should focus on how I'm going to explain to our daughters that they have 3 half-brothers their mother gave away. The mention of their daughters drained the fight from Rose. Yvonne and Jean, she murmured. Oh God, how do I tell them? That's something you should have considered 27 years ago, Spencer replied coldly. Or at any point since. He grabbed his keys from the desk. I'm going to the office, I need to think. Spencer, please. Not now, Rose, just not now. The front door closed with quiet finality, leaving Rose alone in the cavernous house that had once felt like a sanctuary, but now seemed more like a beautiful prison of her own making. She poured another bourbon and carried it to the family room, where photographs chronicled the life she and Spencer had built. Their wedding day, Yvonne's first ballet recital, Jean's high school graduation, family vacations in Aspen and the Amalfi Coast, a perfect family narrative with a crucial chapter missing. Rose's gaze lingered on a recent photo of her daughters, Yvonne's blonde hair and confident smile so like Spencer's, Jean's more serious expression reminiscent of Rose's own mother. Neither girl inherited her green eyes. Those had gone to the sons no one knew about, the sons who now held her future in their hands. With sudden resolution, Rose retrieved Donald's business card and dialed the number. I didn't expect to Hear from you so soon, Donald answered on the second ring. We need to meet again, just us, no Spencer, no business deals, just a mother and her sons. The words felt strange on her tongue, yet oddly right. A pause then. Martin's penthouse. 1 hour. She arrived at the Midtown high-rise precisely, on time, dressed in a simple black dress rather than the designer gown she'd worn to the expo. The security guard called up, and she was directed to the private elevator that opened directly into the penthouse. All three brothers were waiting, though their earlier formal attire had been replaced with casual clothes that emphasized both their similarities and subtle differences. Donald in a chambray button-down, Colin in a simple black t-shirt, Martin in a polo that matched his eyes, her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," Rose said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Would you like something to drink?" Martin offered, gesturing toward the bar. She shook her head. "I want a clear head for this conversation." The four of them sat in the living area, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the Atlanta skyline. The room was tastefully decorated in masculine tones of gray and blue, with several framed photographs Rose couldn't quite make out from where she sat. "I need to understand what you really want," she began. "Beyond the public acknowledgement, beyond the business deal with Spencer's firm. What do you want from me?" The brothers exchanged glances before Donald spoke. "When we first found each other, we spent months comparing our lives, looking for patterns, similarities, trying to understand nature versus nurture. We had different upbringings," Colin continued. "I was raised in Boston by university professors. Donald grew up in Chicago with a single mother who worked as an ER nurse. Martin's family owned a restaurant in Philadelphia. Different cities, different socioeconomic backgrounds," Martin added. "But we all ended up at prestigious universities. We all excelled academically. We all have the same analytical way of thinking and the same drive to succeed. And we all grew up with the same question," Donald said quietly. "Why didn't our birth mother want us?" The directness of the question made Rose's chest tighten. "It wasn't that I didn't want you," she whispered. "I was young and scared and completely under my parents' control." "Were you?" Colin challenged. "Or was it easier to let them make the hard decision? To walk away with your future intact while we were separated and scattered to different corners of the country?" "I'm not here to defend what I did," Rose said. "Nothing I say can undo the past or make up for what you lost." "We didn't just lose you," Donald pointed out. "We lost each other. 20 years of brotherhood gone because separating us made the adoptions easier to arrange." Rose hadn't known that particular detail, and the revelation struck her like a physical blow. They never told me you'd be separated." "Would it have made a difference?" Martin asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'd like to think so, but honestly, I was terrified and sheltered and completely unprepared to defy my parents. By the time I might have found the courage, it was too late. The adoptions were finalized." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Martin stood and walked to one of the framed photographs, bringing it back to Rose. "This is Jackson, our father. It was taken about 5 years before he died." Rose's hands trembled as she accepted the frame. The young man she had loved had matured into a distinguished-looking professor with gray at his temples, but with the same warm smile and intelligent eyes she remembered. Her vision blurred with tears. "He never married," Donald said softly. "Never had other children." "Did he—" Rose swallowed hard. "Did he hate me?" "His sister told us he never spoke of you with bitterness," Martin replied. "Only regret for what might have been." Rose traced Jackson's face through the glass. "I've thought of him so often over the years, wondered where he was, what he became." "He was a professor of African American literature at Howard University," Colin said. "Published 3 books, won teaching awards, made a difference in his students' lives." "He would have been proud of you," Rose whispered, looking up at her sons. "All of you." "We know," Donald replied with quiet confidence. "We've built something meaningful together, but there's still a missing piece. You." As the meaning of his words sank in, Rose realized this meeting wasn't about revenge or blackmail or even public acknowledgement. It was about three men seeking connection with the mother they never knew. And perhaps if she found the courage to take the next step, it could be about a mother reconnecting with the sons she had never allowed herself to mourn. Outside, lightning flashed across the Atlanta sky, a summer storm brewing on the horizon. Inside, the tension between them crackled with similar energy, the potential for destruction or renewal hanging in the balance of what would happen next. Rose set the framed photograph of Jackson back on the coffee table. When I got pregnant, I imagined a future for us, Jackson, me, and our baby. I didn't even know I was carrying triplets until my 5th month. She smiled faintly at the memory. The doctor's face when he saw the ultrasound, I thought he was going to fall over. But you still didn't reach out to our father, Colin observed, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. By then, my parents had already made all the arrangements. I was living at the facility in North Georgia, isolated from everyone I knew. Rose's hands twisted in her lap. They monitored my phone calls, my mail. When I tried to call Jackson from a payphone during a supervised trip to town, my mother's friend who was watching me caught me and took the phone away. They essentially imprisoned you, Donald said, his analytical mind putting the pieces together. It felt that way, yes, but I was also a coward, Rose admitted. I kept telling myself that once the babies, you, were born, I'd find a way to keep you, to contact Jackson. But when the time came, her voice trailed off. You were overwhelmed, Martin supplied, his expression softening slightly. She nodded. 3 tiny babies, no support, no job, no money of my own, no place to live except my parents' house. They controlled everything. So you signed the papers, Colin concluded. Yes, and then I did what my father always taught me, to do with painful truths. I buried it deep and built a perfect life on top of the grave. Rose looked at each of them in turn. But seeing you tonight, it's as if the ground has split open. Martin leaned forward. Here's what I don't understand. You've had opportunities to find us over the years. The adoption records could have been unsealed with your consent. Rose's face flushed with shame. I convinced myself you were better off without me, that searching for you would only disrupt your lives. She paused, and I was afraid of facing what I'd done, of Spencer and the girls finding out. And now? Donald asked quietly. Now I'm still afraid, but I'm more afraid of losing this chance. She took a deep breath. I'll do it. Co-host your gala, acknowledge you publicly, not because of the business deal, but because it's time for the truth. The brothers exchanged glances again. That silent communication Rose was beginning to recognize. There's something you should know, Martin finally said. The business deal with Powell Financial is real and we do want you at the gala, but the deadline, the ultimatum, that was a test. A test? Rose echoed, confused. We needed to know if you would choose us for ourselves, not because we forced your hand, Donald explained. If you had refused, we wouldn't have tanked the deal. Though we might have gone with another investment firm, Colin added with a slight smile. Rose didn't know whether to be relieved or angry. So the blackmail was a bluff? Not entirely, Martin clarified. We do want recognition. We do want a relationship with you, if that's something you want too. But we're not the scared, abandoned children you might have imagined. We don't need to destroy your life to feel whole. A weight lifted from Rose's chest, only to be replaced by a new, heavier one. If they weren't forcing her hand, then the choice, and its consequences, was truly hers alone. Spencer may not forgive me for this, she said softly. That's between you and your husband, Donald replied. But if it helps, we respect him. We've been watching your family for some time, and he seems like a good man. The idea that they had been observing her family was unsettling, but Rose couldn't blame them for their curiosity. How much do you know about my life? We know you volunteer at the Children's Hospital every Wednesday, Martin said. that you sit on the board of 3 major charities, that you fought to get more scholarship funding for underprivileged students at your daughter's private school. You've been trying to atone, Donald observed, in your own way. Rose hadn't thought of her charitable work in those terms before, but perhaps they were right. I've tried to do good in the world. We know, Colin acknowledged, his tone softer than it had been all evening. That's partly why we decided to approach you now rather than years ago when we first found you. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows as lightning illuminated the city in brief electric moments. Inside, the atmosphere was changing too, the initial tension giving way to something more complex. I'd like to tell you about your father, Rose said suddenly. The Jackson I knew. And I'd like to hear about your lives, not just the highlights, but the real stories. For the next hour, they talked. Rose described meeting Jackson in the campus library, their first date at a tiny jazz club, the way he'd recite poetry when they walked across campus together. The triplets shared stories of their adoptive families. Donald's mother, who worked double shifts to send him to the right schools. Martin's childhood in his family's busy restaurant. Colin's intellectual upbringing with professors who challenged him constantly. We each had what we needed, Donald reflected. Different paths, but they all led us to where we are now. Together, Martin added with a meaningful look at Rose. The conversation flowed more easily as the night wore on, years of questions finally finding answers. Rose found herself laughing at some of their stories, tearing up at others. She saw echoes of Jackson in their mannerisms, glimpses of her own parents in their determination, and something entirely unique that belonged only to them. As midnight approached, Rose reluctantly stood. I should go, Spencer might be home by now. He's not, Colin said, checking his phone. He's still at his office. Our security team saw him there 20 minutes ago. Rose raised an eyebrow. Security team? We like to be thorough, Martin explained unapologetically. I'm beginning to understand how you've become so successful, she remarked dryly. Nothing left to chance. Almost nothing, Donald corrected. We couldn't predict how you would react tonight. I'm still figuring that out myself, Rose admitted, but I know I want to know you, all of you, if you'll let me. Martin walked her to the elevator. You should talk to Spencer, he advised, and your daughters. Soon. I will, she promised. Tomorrow. The gala is in 3 weeks, he reminded her. If you're going to do this, everyone in your life should hear the truth from you first. Rose nodded, the reality of what lay ahead settling heavily on her shoulders. Will you be there when I tell my daughters? Martin looked surprised by the request. Do you want us to be? I think, yes, they should meet their brothers. As the elevator doors opened, Martin hesitated, then stepped forward and briefly embraced her. The contact was awkward, tentative, but it sent tears streaming down Rose's face. We'll be there, he promised. Just let us know when. The rain had stopped by the time Rose reached her car, but the streets were slick and shining under the streetlights. As she drove, her mind raced with thoughts of the conversations to come, with Spencer, with her daughters, with her friends and social circle. Each would require courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Her phone rang through the car's speaker system. Spencer's name appeared on the dashboard display. Rose, where are you? His voice was tight with strain. I've been calling for hours. I was with them, she replied simply. With my sons. A long pause. Come to the office. Now. There's something you need to see. Spencer, what? Just come, Rose. 15th floor conference room. The call disconnected. Puzzled and increasingly anxious, Rose changed direction and headed downtown toward the gleaming tower that housed Powell Financial. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait until morning? The building was mostly dark when she arrived, just the security lights and a few scattered offices still illuminated. The security guard, who knew her well, nodded her through without question. When the elevator opened on the 15th floor, she saw light spilling from the main conference room. As she approached, she could hear voices, Spencer's and others she couldn't immediately identify. She pushed open the door and froze. Spencer sat at the head of the conference table, his face grave. Across from him sat her daughters, Yvonne and Jean, both in travel clothes, both with expressions of shock and confusion. And at the other end of the table were Donald, Colin, and Martin. "Mom?" Jean's voice was small and uncertain. "What's going on?" Dad called and said we needed to come home immediately, and when we got here, these men were saying, "I thought we agreed I would tell them," Rose said to Martin, feeling betrayed. "We didn't do this," Donald replied calmly. "Your husband called us after you left the penthouse, said if this was happening, it was happening tonight, on his terms." Spencer stood, his expression unreadable. "No more secrets, Rose. No more waiting for the perfect moment that will never come. Our daughters deserve the truth, and they deserve it now." 5 pairs of eyes turned to Rose, her husband's, her daughter's, and the identical green eyes of the sons she had only just begun to know. In that moment, she realized that the careful life she had constructed was already gone, shattered beyond repair. What happened next would determine whether something new and honest could rise from the ruins. "Yes," she said finally. "It's time for the truth." The conference room fell silent as Rose moved to the center of the table, directly between her daughters and her sons, symbols of her divided life now facing each other across polished mahogany. "Mom?" Yvonne's voice wavered. At 22, she was the image of Rose at that age, confident, polished, with the poise that came from privilege. "Dad said these men that they're my sons," Rose confirmed quietly. "Your half-brothers." Jean, 19, and more reserved than her sister, stared at the triplets with widening eyes. "But that's impossible. You would have told us." "I should have," Rose agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "It's a long story and not an easy one, but you deserve to hear all of it." Spencer took his seat again, his expression stony. "Yes, all of it. No more sanitized versions." Rose took a deep breath and began the story again, this time holding nothing back. She described meeting Jackson, falling in love, becoming pregnant, the pressure from her parents, the isolation, the impossible choice she'd been forced to make. With each revelation, she watched her daughter's expressions shift from disbelief to shock to something more complex. "Granddad and Grandma made you give up your babies?" Jean whispered, horrified. The grandparents she had adored suddenly cast in a disturbing new light. "They thought they were protecting me," Rose said, though the justification sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It was a different time, but that's no excuse. I should have been stronger." "And you never told Dad all these years?" Yvonne turned accusingly to Spencer. "Did you know?" "Not until today," Spencer replied, his voice flat. "At the Auto Expo." Colin leaned forward. "Mrs. Powell didn't know we would be there. We orchestrated the meeting." "Why now?" Jean asked, looking directly at the triplets. "After all this time?" "We found each other 10 years ago," Donald explained. "It took years more to trace our birth parents. We found out about your mother's identity 3 years ago." "3 years?" Yvonne echoed. "You've known about our family for 3 years and said nothing?" "We needed time," Martin said simply. "To build our company, to establish ourselves, to decide what we wanted from this reunion." "And what exactly do you want?" Jean asked, her analytical mind, so like her father's, cutting to the heart of the matter. The triplets exchanged glances before Donald answered. "Initially, recognition. Acknowledgement that we exist, that we're part of this family's story, even if we weren't part of its life." "And now?" Yvonne pressed. "Now we're not sure," Colin admitted. "Meeting your mother has complicated things." Rose felt a flicker of hope at his words. Perhaps they had felt it too, that unexpected connection, the pull of biological ties that decades of separation couldn't entirely sever. "There's going to be a charity gala," she told her daughters, "for adoptees' rights and family reunification. I've agreed to co-host it with Donald, Colin, and Martin. You're going public with this? Yvonne looked stunned. What about your position on the museum board, the historical society, your friends? The question stung with its implication that Rose's social standing might matter more than acknowledging her son's. I don't care about any of that anymore, she said firmly. I've lived with this secret for too long. Spencer made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. A convenient moral awakening now that they've forced your hand. They didn't force anything, Rose countered. The ultimatum was a test, Spencer, to see if I would choose them freely. And you have, he observed coldly. Yes, she agreed. I have. Jean had been studying the triplets intently. Now she addressed them directly. You said you found each other 10 years ago. What was that like? Did you know immediately you were related? The question broke some of the tension in the room. Donald smiled faintly. It was surreal. I was at a tech conference at MIT where Colin was a graduate student. Someone mistook me for him, and when we met face to face, it was like looking in a mirror, Colin continued. We knew instantly we were twins. The DNA test just confirmed it. And then we found records suggesting there might have been a third baby, Donald added. It took another year to track down Martin. My adoption was handled differently, Martin explained. My parents moved around a lot when I was young. Made me harder to find. As they spoke, Rose watched her daughter's expressions soften. Jean, always hungry for knowledge, was clearly fascinated by the triplets' story. Yvonne remained more guarded, but she was listening intently. You have the same eyes as Mom, Jean observed suddenly. Exactly the same. Our father's features are mother's eyes, Martin confirmed with a slight smile. Your father, Yvonne said carefully. What was he like? Rose felt a rush of gratitude toward her older daughter for asking the question. Jackson was brilliant, she began, but Donald gently interrupted. We have photos, videos his sister shared with us. He passed his phone to the girls, showing them a collection of images. Jackson in academic regalia at a graduation, Jackson laughing with students, Jackson in a quiet moment at his desk. As Yvonne and Jean looked through the photos, Rose saw Spencer watching them with an unreadable expression. She moved to stand beside him. I'm sorry, she whispered. For all of it. For not telling you from the beginning. Would it have made a difference, he asked. If I had known when we first met, would you have married me anyway? The question caught her off guard. Of course. Why wouldn't I have? Because part of what attracted you to me was that I had no connection. To your past, he said with quiet certainty. I represented a clean slate, Rose. A way to start over without any reminders of what you'd lost. The insight was so accurate it left her speechless. Spencer had always been perceptive, but she hadn't realized how clearly he saw her. Perhaps more clearly than she saw herself. Across the table, an unexpected sound broke the tension. Jean was laughing at something Martin had said, a genuine laugh that reminded Rose of when her younger daughter was a child. Yvonne was smiling too, reluctantly but genuinely, as Donald showed them something on his phone. They're getting along, Rose murmured in surprise. Did you expect them to hate each other? Spencer asked. I don't know what I expected. Nothing about this situation is normal. No, he agreed. It's not. He paused, watching the interaction. But they are their mother's children, all 5 of them, adaptable, resilient. Rose studied her husband's profile. What happens now, Spencer? With us? He turned to face her, fully. I don't know. 24 years isn't easily dismissed. Neither is a lie of this magnitude. I didn't lie about loving you, she said softly. I never have. Before Spencer could respond, Colin approached them. There's something else you should know, he said, his tone serious, about the business deal with Powell Financial. Spencer straightened, instantly alert. What about it? It's legitimate. Our interest in the luxury automobile sector is genuine, but there's another component we haven't disclosed. Colin glanced at his brothers, who nodded encouragingly. We've done extensive research on Jackson Lewis's family history. What does that have to do with my company? Spencer asked, confused. Jackson's great-grandfather was William Lewis, a formerly enslaved man who became a master mechanic. He designed an improved transmission system for early automobiles in 1902, but his patent application was stolen by Powell Motor Works, Spencer finished, the color draining from his face. My great-grandfather's company. Rose gasped. That can't be coincidence. It's not, Colin confirmed. When we discovered the connection between our father's ancestor and your husband's family business, it seemed like fate. A wrong that could finally be righted. You're investing in my company because of a 100-year-old patent dispute? Spencer looked incredulous. We're investing because it's sound business, Donald clarified, joining them. But we're also creating a foundation in William Lewis's name that will fund engineering scholarships for Black students. We'd like Powell Financial to be the primary corporate sponsor. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt in the already charged atmosphere. Rose looked from her sons to her husband, trying to gauge his reaction. You planned all of this, Spencer said slowly. The meeting at the Auto Expo, the investment deal, the charity gala, the foundation, it's all connected. We're businessmen, Martin replied, unapologetic. We see patterns and connections others miss, and we believe in what Donald calls elegant solutions, strategies that resolve multiple problems at once. And what problems are you solving? Here? Spencer demanded. Historical injustice, Donald said, family separation, racial inequity in the automotive industry, and our own need for closure. Jean and Yvonne had moved closer, listening intently to the exchange. Rose noticed her daughter's eyes darting between their father and their newly discovered brothers, assessing the shifting power dynamics. So this whole reconciliation, Spencer began, is genuine, Martin interrupted firmly. Our business, interests, and our personal ones may overlap, but that doesn't make either less real. A heavy silence fell over the group. Rose could feel the weight of generations, past wrongs, present revelations, and future possibilities, pressing down on all of them. It's nearly 4 a.m, she finally said, noticing the exhaustion in everyone's faces. We should continue this conversation after we've all had some rest. We have a board meeting at 9, Spencer said grimly. The terms of the deal need to be finalized. And we have classes, Yvonne added. Or do you expect us to just go back to school as if nothing has happened? No, Rose replied. Nothing will be the same after tonight, but decisions made in exhaustion are rarely good ones. Your mother's right, Spencer conceded. To the triplets, he added, We'll meet tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. My office. Bring your lawyers. As they prepared to leave, Rose found herself standing between her two families, one built on truth, the other on a mission. The weight of her choices, past and present, pressed heavily on her shoulders. Martin approached her, speaking quietly. Whatever happens with the business deal, our offer stands. We want you at the gala. We want to know our mother. And my daughters? Rose asked. Where do they fit in this new arrangement? That's up to them, Donald replied, glancing at Yvonne and Jean. But they're our sisters. If they want to know us, we're here. As they stepped into the pre-dawn darkness outside the Powell Financial Building, Rose couldn't help but feel they were standing on the precipice of something momentous. The carefully constructed walls between her past and present had not just cracked but completely collapsed. What would rise from the rubble remained to be seen. What she couldn't know was that the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The next afternoon found them all in Spencer's office. The triplets with their lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Donna Rumsfeld, Spencer with his legal team, Rose off to one side, feeling strangely like an observer in her own life story. Yvonne and Jean had insisted on being present despite their parents' objections. Let's be clear about what's on the table, Spencer began, his voice steady and controlled. M3 Ventures proposes a 20% investment in Powell Financial's luxury automobile portfolio, with a separate initiative to establish the William Lewis Foundation. Ms. Rumsfeld nodded. The foundation would require a matching contribution from Powell Financial, as well as a formal acknowledgement of the historical connection. You're asking me to publicly admit that my great-grandfather stole your great-great-grandfather's invention, Spencer stated flatly. We're asking you to acknowledge historical truth, Colin corrected. The records are clear. William Lewis filed the patent application in 1902. 3 months later, Edward Powell filed an almost identical application which was granted. That was over a century ago, one of Spencer's lawyers interjected. The statute of limitations. This isn't about legal liability, Donald interrupted. It's about moral recognition, about setting the record straight. Spencer studied the triplets thoughtfully. And if I refuse? Then we walk away, Martin said simply. No investment, no foundation, no connection between our companies. But the gala, the public acknowledgement of your relationship to my wife? Martin glanced at Rose before answering. That's separate, personal, not business. If Rose still wants to acknowledge us, we welcome it. If not, he shrugged, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his casual tone. Rose found her voice. I will acknowledge you, regardless of any business arrangement. Spencer's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond directly to her. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, regarding the triplets with newfound respect. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Separating the personal from the professional so neither can be used as leverage against the other. We learned early to protect ourselves, Donald replied evenly. Yvonne, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. I have a question. All eyes turned to her. You've talked about acknowledging your existence, about righting historical wrongs, but what about the future? What does this new family arrangement look like going forward? Rose held her breath, waiting for the triplets' response. It was the question she herself hadn't dared to ask. Donald's formal demeanor softened slightly. We don't know, he admitted. This isn't a business deal where we can predict outcomes. It's messier, more uncertain. But we'd like to try, Martin added, to get to know Eugene, your parents, as people, not just as connections or obligations. Even Dad? Jean asked, glancing at Spencer. Colin smiled faintly. Even your father. Whatever happened in the past, he's raised our sisters. That counts for something. The word sisters hung in the air, new and strange, yet somehow right. Rose watched as Yvonne and Jean absorbed it, their expressions thoughtful. I think, Spencer said slowly, we should table the business discussion for today. My team needs time to review the historical documentation and consider the foundation proposal. Ms. Rumsfeld gathered her papers. Of course, we can reconvene tomorrow. As the lawyers filed out, an awkward silence fell over the family members left behind. Rose moved to stand beside her daughters, acutely aware of the division still separating them all. Perhaps, she suggested hesitantly, we could have dinner together, all of us? Before anyone could respond, Spencer's assistant appeared at the door. Mr. Powell, there's a call for you on line 1. She says it's extremely urgent. Spencer frowned. Who is it? A Dr. Lillian Page from Memorial Hospital. She insists on speaking with you personally. Rose felt a chill. That's my doctor. Why would she be calling you? Spencer picked up the phone, his expression concerned. Dr. Page? This is Spencer Powell. Rose watched as his face drained of color. He listened for several long moments, asking occasional short questions, before finally saying, Yes, we'll come right away. When he hung up, he looked directly at Rose, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. What is it? She asked, fear constricting her throat. Your latest test results, he said quietly. They found something in your blood work, something unusual. Mom? Jean moved closer, taking her hand. What tests? Rose swallowed hard. Just routine screenings. I've been feeling tired lately, some dizzy spells, nothing serious. Doctor, Paige disagrees, Spencer said grimly. She wants to see us immediately. She's already called in a specialist. The triplets had been watching this exchange with growing concern. What kind of specialist? Donald asked. Spencer hesitated before answering. A hematologist-oncologist. The word hung in the air like a grenade with its pin removed. Cancer. The possibility was suddenly, terrifyingly real. "I'll drive you," Spencer said to Rose, his earlier coldness replaced by urgent concern. "We're coming too," Yvonne declared, Jean nodding firmly beside her. Rose looked at her sons, standing slightly apart, uncertainty written across their identical faces. "All of us," she said firmly. "If you want to." Martin stepped forward. "We'll follow in our car." The drive to Memorial Hospital passed in tense silence. Rose stared out the window, thoughts racing. She had dismissed the symptoms as stress, as age, as anything but serious. Now, faced with the possibility of a grave diagnosis, she felt a strange sense of clarity cutting through her fear. At the hospital, Dr. Page was waiting with another physician, a Dr. Anthony, who introduced himself as the head of hematology. They were led to a private consultation room rather than an examination area, which only increased Rose's apprehension. "Mrs. Powell," Dr. Page began, "your blood work showed some concerning abnormalities. We ran additional tests which confirmed our suspicions." "Just tell me," Rose said, gripping Spencer's hand tightly. "Is it cancer?" Dr. Anthony leaned forward. "No, Mrs. Powell, you don't have cancer, but you do have a very rare blood disorder called Eisenmenger-Klein syndrome. It's genetic, extremely uncommon, and can cause the symptoms you've been experiencing." Relief at the not cancer was immediately followed by new concern. "Is it terminal?" "Not at all," Dr. Anthony assured her. "It's manageable with proper treatment, but there's something unusual about your case." He glanced at the triplets who stood against the wall. "Are these your sons, Mrs. Powell?" Rose nodded, surprised by the question. "And they're triplets, I understand. Identical?" "Yes," Donald confirmed. "Why is that relevant?" Dr. Anthony looked troubled. "Eisenmenger-Klein syndrome is hereditary, passed from parent to child, but it's exceptionally rare for identical. Multiples to all inherit it. The odds are astronomical." "What are you saying?" Spencer asked sharply. "I'm saying that if these young men are indeed Mrs. Powell biological children, they should be tested immediately. They might be carrying the same genetic marker." Rose felt the room spin slightly. "But I've never had symptoms until recently. Wouldn't they have shown signs by now if they had it?" "Not necessarily," Dr. Page explained. "The condition can remain dormant until triggered by stress, environmental factors, or simply age." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications became clear. If the triplets had inherited this condition, they needed to know. Their health, perhaps their lives, could depend on it. "We'll take the test," Colin said decisively. The next 2 hours were a blur of blood draws, questions about family medical history, and tense waiting. When Dr. Anthony finally returned, his expression was grave. "I have the preliminary results," he announced, "and I'm afraid there's a complication." Rose braced herself, Spencer's arm steady around her shoulders. "Mrs. Powell, you definitely have Eisenmenger-Klein syndrome. But these young men," he looked directly at the triplets, "do not carry the genetic marker. In fact, their blood work shows no relation to you whatsoever." The words hung in the air, incomprehensible at first. "That's impossible," Rose whispered. "They're my sons. I gave birth to them." Dr. Anthony shook his head. "The DNA evidence is conclusive. You are not biologically related to these men. There must be some mistake," Martin insisted, looking as shocked as everyone else. "Our birth certificate lists Rose Blackwell as our mother." "Wait," Donald said suddenly, his analytical mind racing ahead. "Doctor, can Eisenmenger-Klein syndrome cause complications during pregnancy?" "Yes, though it's rare. In severe cases, it can lead to hemorrhaging, particularly during multiple births." Donald turned to Rose, his expression transformed by a sudden terrible understanding. "You said you gave birth at a private facility, a place your parents arranged." Rose nodded, confused. "Yes, in North Georgia. It was called Oakwood Haven, and you hemorrhaged during delivery. Donald continued. Not a question, but a statement. Yes, Rose confirmed, the memories flooding back. It was chaos. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, they told me I had nearly died. Spencer's face had gone pale. What are you suggesting? Donald looked at his brothers, then back at Rose. I think when you hemorrhaged, they couldn't save your babies. Our research showed 3 infant deaths recorded at Oakwood Haven the day we were born, triplet boys, mother unnamed. But that's... Rose couldn't finish the thought, the horror of it too great to articulate. They gave you someone else's babies, Martin said softly. 3 black newborns who needed homes, and they let you believe they were yours. The room seemed to tilt as the full implication hit Rose. My parents knew, she whispered. They must have known. They arranged everything, Colin agreed grimly. The facility, the adoptions. When things went wrong, they found a solution that preserved their plan to get you back to college, reputation intact. But Jackson, Rose said desperately, the DNA test you took confirmed we were related to each other and to Jackson Lewis, Donald explained. But we never tested against you. We just assumed. The revelation crashed over them all like a tidal wave, rearranging everything they thought they knew. Rose wasn't the triplets' biological mother. She had given birth to 3 baby boys who had died before she ever held them. And somewhere out there was a woman who had given birth to Donald, Colin, and Martin, a woman who might never have known what happened to her sons. Does this change your answer? Rose asked, suddenly looking at the triplets. About wanting to know me. Martin stepped forward, his expression solemn but certain. You're the woman who should have raised us. The woman who's carried the weight of giving us up for 27 years. Biology doesn't change that. We're still connected, Donald E. added. Just not in the way we thought. As Rose looked around the room at her daughters, her husband, and the 3 men who were and weren't her sons, she realized that family, true family, was more complex and more resilient than blood alone. We still have a lot to figure out, she said finally, but I think we can do it. Together. Outside the window, the Atlanta sun broke through clouds that had threatened rain all day, illuminating the hospital room with unexpected warmth and light. It wasn't an ending, not really. More like a beginning, complicated and uncertain, but filled with possibilities none of them could have imagined just days before. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free, it rewrites your whole life. Eleanor thought her past was dead and buried. But what if the real story is just beginning? If you made it this far, tell me, where are you listening from today? I'll see you in the next story. Take care.